The studio lights were blinding, but Mark Wahlberg barely noticed them as he settled into his chair at the View's iconic table. The familiar theme music faded, applause rolled across the audience, and for a brief moment everything felt routine. Mark smiled, nodding politely as introductions wrapped up. He had done dozens of talk shows over the years, early mornings, late nights, friendly banter, the occasional tough question. This was supposed to be no different. He was there to promote a new project, talk about fatherhood, fitness, and the discipline that had reshaped his life. At least, that was the plan. At first, the conversation stayed light. There were jokes about his famously strict daily schedule, playful remarks about waking up before dawn, and laughter when he admitted that even he struggled to keep up with his own routine sometimes. The audience responded warmly. Mark relaxed slightly, leaning back, his hands resting on his knees. He spoke with confidence, the practiced ease of someone used to being in front of cameras, but there was sincerity in his voice when he talked about his kids and the responsibility he felt to set an example. The shift was subtle at first. Sunny Hostin tilted her head, listening closely, then asked a question that sounded reasonable on the surface. She referenced comments Mark had made in a recent interview about success being rooted in discipline, personal accountability, and making the right choices. Her tone was calm, but pointed. "Do you think," she asked, "that message ignores the reality that not everyone starts from the same place?" Mark straightened in his chair. He nodded once, slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. He spoke about his own upbringing, about growing up in a rough neighborhood, getting into trouble at a young age, and making mistakes that nearly derailed his life. He emphasized that he wasn't denying inequality or hardship, but that personal responsibility had been the turning point for him. "I had to own my choices," he said. "Nobody was coming to save me." Sunny leaned forward, her hands clasped. She countered gently at first, pointing out systemic barriers, the role of privilege, and how messages about just working harder could feel dismissive to people trapped by circumstances beyond their control. The air in the studio grew heavier. The other hosts shifted in their seats, glancing between them. The audience grew quieter, sensing the tension building. Mark's jaw tightened. He spoke again, his voice firmer now, insisting that accountability wasn't an insult but a necessary truth. He stressed that recognizing obstacles didn't mean surrendering to them. "If I'd blamed the system for everything," he said, "I wouldn't be where I am today." His hands moved as he talked, palms opening and closing, the energy in his body clearly rising. Sunny responded without raising her voice, but her words landed sharply. She challenged the idea that one person's story could be used as a universal template. "Your experience," she said, "doesn't erase the reality that some people work just as hard and still don't get the same outcomes." A murmur rippled through the audience. One of the co-hosts tried to interject, offering a bridge between the perspectives, but the moment had already slipped past polite debate. Mark leaned forward now, elbows on the table. His expression hardened, not with rage, but with something closer to wounded pride. He spoke about sacrifice, about discipline, about the danger of what he saw as lowering expectations. His voice edged louder, not shouting, but unmistakably intense. Sunny didn't back down. She pressed on, her words precise, challenging what she saw as oversimplification. The conversation began to overlap. Sentences collided. Attempts to moderate were drowned out by the momentum of the clash. The studio, once bright and friendly, now felt tight, almost claustrophobic. Mark glanced briefly at the audience, then back at Sunny, his eyes sharp. For a split second, it looked like he might pull back, soften the exchange. Instead, he inhaled deeply. "I didn't come here to be talked down to," he said, his voice controlled but carrying a hard edge. The words landed heavily. Chairs shifted. Someone in the audience gasped. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression. Sunny's face registered surprise, then resolve. She began to respond, clarifying her point, insisting that disagreement wasn't disrespect. But Mark was already shaking his head. He pushed his chair back slightly, the sound of it scraping against the floor amplified in the sudden quiet. He adjusted his jacket, a small, deliberate movement that felt final. "I've lived this," he added, his voice low. "Don't tell me I don't understand." There was a pause, thick and uncomfortable, the kind that stretches time. A producer's voice crackled faintly through someone's earpiece. Without another word, Mark stood. The audience erupted into scattered reactions, shock, whispers, a few claps, a few boos. He nodded once, not to anyone in particular, and turned away from the table. As he walked off the set, the cameras followed him for a few steps before cutting back to the hosts, frozen between professionalism and disbelief. The studio buzzed with tension, the argument hanging in the air long after Mark disappeared behind the curtain, leaving everyone watching to wonder how a conversation meant to inspire had unraveled so completely. Backstage, the noise of the studio faded into a dull hum as Mark stepped into the narrow corridor behind the set. The door swung shut behind him, muting the applause and murmurs that still lingered on the other side. For a moment, he just stood there, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling as adrenaline surged through him. The polished calm he'd maintained on camera cracked the instant he was out of sight. He dragged a hand over his face, jaw clenched, replaying the exchange in his mind, every interruption, every pointed phrase, every second he felt his words were being twisted. A production assistant hesitated a few feet away, unsure whether to approach. Mark paced once, then again, the soles of his shoes tapping sharply against the floor. He wasn't angry in the way headlines would later suggest. It was something messier, frustration tangled with a deep, old defensiveness. He had walked into that studio carrying his past like a scar, something he owned, something he'd worked relentlessly to overcome. To him, it wasn't a talking point. It was survival. Inside the studio, the show scrambled to recover. Sunny Hostin sat upright, hands folded neatly on the table, her expression composed but tight. She spoke carefully, addressing the audience directly, explaining that disagreement wasn't disrespect, that difficult conversations were part of why the show existed. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge beneath it, a mixture of disappointment and conviction. The other hosts nodded, some offering conciliatory remarks, others gently reframing the debate to calm the moment. The cameras rolled, but the atmosphere had changed irreversibly. Everyone knew they were witnessing damage control in real time. Back in the hallway, a producer finally approached Mark, speaking softly, apologetically. She suggested taking a few minutes, maybe reconsidering, maybe returning to finish the segment. Mark listened, arms crossed, eyes unfocused. The suggestion hung in the air, tempting in its simplicity. Walk back, smooth things over, smile for the cameras. He'd done that before in his career, played the part, swallowed discomfort for the sake of optics. This time, he shook his head. I'm done, he said quietly. There was no drama in his voice, just finality. As he headed toward the exit, his phone began vibrating relentlessly in his pocket. Texts, missed calls. He ignored them. The building felt suddenly too warm, the hallways too long. When he finally stepped outside, the cool air hit his face like a reset. He inhaled deeply, as if trying to pull himself back into his body. A few fans had gathered near the entrance, eyes wide with curiosity. Mark offered a brief nod, a tight smile, then slid into the waiting car. The drive away from the studio was silent. The city blurred past the windows as his thoughts raced. He wondered how the moment would be framed, how quickly nuance would be stripped away and replaced with outrage. He could already imagine the headlines, the clips looping endlessly online. Storms off, heated clash, walks out live. He exhaled slowly, knowing none of those words would capture what he actually felt, that the argument had touched something raw, something unresolved. By the time the episode ended, social media was already on fire. Short clips spread faster than context ever could. Some praised Mark for standing his ground, calling him authentic, unapologetic. Others criticized him for walking away, accusing him of shutting down a necessary conversation. Sunny's comments were dissected, defended, attacked. Every expression, every pause, became evidence for one side or the other. The moment no longer belonged to either of them. It had become public property. Later that evening, Mark sat alone in a quiet room, the TV muted as footage of the walk-off played on a news channel. Seeing himself stand up and leave felt strangely distant, like watching someone else make the choice for him. He thought about his kids, about the lessons he tried to teach them, about standing up for yourself, but also about listening. The line between the two felt uncomfortably thin now. Across town, Sunny reflected on the exchange in her own way. She replayed the conversation too, wondering if there was a different phrasing, a softer entry point that might have kept him at the table. She believed in hard conversations, believed they mattered precisely because they were uncomfortable. But she also understood how personal they could become, how easily lived experience could turn into armor. As she prepared for the next day's show, she knew the discussion wasn't over. It would continue, with or without Mark sitting across from her. The following morning, headlines dominated entertainment news. Analysts debated whether Mark's exit was justified or impulsive. Talk radio hosts argued over who was right. Comment sections became battlegrounds. Yet beneath all the noise, a quieter truth lingered. Two people had collided over deeply held beliefs, neither entirely wrong, neither willing to bend in that moment. Mark eventually broke his silence with a brief statement, measured and calm. He spoke about the importance of respectful dialogue and acknowledged that emotions had run high. He didn't apologize for leaving, but he didn't attack anyone either. The statement did little to stop the debate, but it shifted the tone slightly, reminding some that the people at the center of the controversy were human, not characters. In the end, the walk-off became one more cultural flashpoint in a long series of them, an argument frozen in time, replayed and reinterpreted endlessly. For Mark, it was a reminder that his story, no matter how personal, would always be filtered through other lenses once he shared it publicly. For Sonny, it reinforced the risk inherent in asking hard questions on a live stage. And for the audience watching, the moment lingered not because someone left the set, but because it exposed how fragile conversations can become when identity, experience, and belief collide under bright lights. The chairs were reset, the cameras moved on, but the tension of that day remained, an unresolved echo of a conversation cut short, leaving everyone to decide for themselves what walking away really meant.